Right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And for those who are viewing this meeting remotely, this is a meeting of the Personnel Committee. The apologies will follow in a minute, but the papers have been circulated and they're on our website. If we do get disconnected, I shall adjourn until such time that we can get reconnected. And if we can't, then the business will be conducted at a later date. So we'll take it from there. Apologies from my colleague, Councillor Andrew, who's been unfortunately struck down with the dreaded COVID. My colleague, Councillor Toe, is substituting for him. Are there any declarations of interest? For those viewing remotely, this is a point where any member or officer has any business on here which they have any connection or any interest in. Councillor?
Sorry, just on the apologies, Chair. Councillor Hussein's apologies. Councillor Bashir's substituting and Councillor Gultasib.
Okay.
Thank you. Got those. Thank you.
Right, lovely. Thank you. Are there any such declarations of interest? No. Local Government Access to Information Act. There is an item in the private session, and so therefore we will move the appropriate resolution on the agenda to enable that to happen. I understand that one of the people who was going to contribute has also got COVID, and therefore I think Michelle has stepped in at the last minute. Is that correct, Michelle?
I am here, but Nikki's also here. She is on her last day of isolation.
Oh, right. Okay. Well,
they're Nick's papers.
Oh, so Nick should be Nikki. You're in kind of the dark there.
I am, yes. I'm isolating in my bedroom, so I've got limited light, unfortunately. It's my ninth day in here.
Okay. Just for the record, it will be my prerogative in the future to request that officers presenting will be in the room, obviously subject to COVID, and there will be no exceptions from that, because I think it is important that when we are having reports that it is easier to question people when they're in the room. We had difficulties with the planning committee when I made the same decision, and that will continue to be the case, because it's not so much our knowledge of teams, it is the people who are contributing knowledge of teams. And in the planning committee, we had terrible trouble with keeping people on track and indeed in the room. So it will be my intention, and if anybody is presenting, then I will expect them to be here personally, unless, as you know, Nicola is isolating and Michelle is supporting her there. I see my colleague, Councillor Andrew, is listening in, but he can't vote because he's not in the room. That's the rules.
Correct.
So, thank you very much. Moving on then to approve the minutes of the meeting of the 6th of December. Those are enclosed. Are we happy with that? It's moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Anthony Harris. I'll make a vote on that. All those in favour, please. That is carried. Thank you. We then move on to the annual health and safety report, which is item 5 on the agenda, copy of which is enclosed with the papers and appears on the website. So can we have a lead on this, please?
Chris.
Evening, councillors, colleagues. Hopefully you've had a chance to read the Personnel Committee report and the annual health and safety report it covers. The report's an information item, and you are asked to note the contents of the annual health and safety report and ensure it is appropriate to help promote a positive health and safety culture across the council. If I can go through some of the highlights briefly. CMT agreed a few years back to reintroduce an annual health and safety report. This is the 5th one we've fifth of these such reports since we reintroduced, and they've been well received, so we've stuck with the format. CMT actually agreed this last week, so we're good to go on this one. We believe the underlying message is that health and safety is well managed across the council.
Chris, I don't know what you're using by way of. We can't understand the word you're saying, with respect. And I don't mean that it's your accent or anything like that, but I think it's the equipment you're using. I don't know what you are.
I'll try different versions.
Are you using your Apple EarPods? Fair enough. This is one of the reasons I specify wherever possible we have officers in the room.
Is that better?
Marginally, but it needs some sound now. Needs some volume.
I can't do much about that at this end. I don't know if Paul can increase the volume at your end at all.
No, that's not very good either.
I will try to speak loudly if that helps. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Might help if you speak a little bit slower,
Okay.
because the acoustics are, put it bluntly, rubbish.
Okay. As I said, hopefully you've had a chance to read the Personnel Committee report and the annual health and safety report, which forms an appendix to it. It's information item mainly, and you're asked to note the contents of the report and share it as appropriate across the council to help promote a positive health and safety culture. If I can go through some of the highlights, CMT agreed a few years back to reintroduce an annual health and safety report. This is the 5th report since they were reintroduced, and it was agreed by CMT last week. So far, the reports have been well received, and so we've stuck with the format. We believe the underlying message is that health and safety is well managed, and we have systems and controls in place to give us reassurance and identify any areas of improvement. You'll note the report covers 2020-2021, and as you'll know, COVID-19 had an impact on all our services during that time, including much of the work of the health and safety team, including our audits, fire risk assessment and training programmes, all of which took a hit. However, that did give us some capacity to deal with COVID, particularly ensuring the schools could reopen safely. COVID also had a dramatic impact on accident and aggressive incident numbers, all of which fell. Working from home meant staff incidents reduced quite dramatically, and given many public-facing services were closed or offered remotely, our public accidents fell as well. But we do expect some recovery on both of those, particularly the public accidents, now that our leisure centres, etc., are reopened fully. COVID will, no doubt, continue to bring challenges. That said, we continue to look to improve our policies, systems, etc., to get better at health and safety, and we have a rolling programme of review to get better doing that. I'm happy to answer any questions. But other than that, can I take it you're happy with the report and we'll share it to promote a health and safety culture?
Right. Are there any questions to the report, please? As I said, the acoustics are very poor, but Aftab?
Just one question, Chair, please. On page 19 or page 8, however you look at it, under the pie charts that they've got for accidents, on the kinds of employee accidents on corporate, there's a large proportion of it, 48%, that just says other.
There are a lot of categories of accidents we record under, some of which are very few accidents, but that captures all the other things, which could be sporting injuries. It could be bitten by an animal. It could be, there's all sorts of weird and wonderful things which are categorised and you know often have very low numbers, and we group those together under other. I can give you a breakdown at some point if you'd like, and go into more detail. But it captures all the other ones which don't fall under the main categories, which are usually slip, trip, fall, or hit something fixed or stationary.
Okay, Councillor Toe.
Only a couple of things, Chair. You know me in acronyms. On page 6, where the accidents are reported, you've got all kind of acronyms that cover what the accidents were. I haven't got a clue what they are. What's ASC stand for?
Sorry, that's adult social care, and then it's children's services, then economy and environment and community.
So it's the by-directorate.
It is, yes.
Fine, got it now. And the other thing, thank you for that. I didn't drop that one. That's the trouble with acronyms. You don't on the page, you don't know. And the other thing is about this asbestos claim that's been going on for almost 40 years.
Well, with asbestos, as you're probably aware, if you're exposed to asbestos, it can be decades later before symptoms start to show and you start to suffer from it. Consequently, where there's been asbestos exposure, we have to keep health records for 40 years plus. Whereas normally accident reports, after about 5 years, most of them can be removed. The problem is going back 40 years is that it's very difficult to tell what happened at the time, how the person was exposed, etc. And that's obviously where the insurance company comes in, and sometimes they will fight claims, and other times they will go along with claims. But it is very difficult because this particular person could have had lots of different jobs over their lifetime, been exposed to asbestos in numerous scenarios, and it appears to be us who are getting the final bill for it. I say that is ongoing at the moment. It's over £300,000 which has been paid out so far, but it's only came in, I believe, this year as a claim, and it's 40 years after the date.
So just to so we won't know what the final figure will be for this then.
I don't know at the moment. That's the only figures we got from our risk and insurance section. Obviously, it isn't closed at the moment. It could be that they're just tying up the loose ends, or it could be there are further funds to go out. Risk and insurance would know that, and obviously our insurers directly.
Big figure, isn't it?
It is. It's obviously that shows you why. I think sometimes health issues are the forgotten part of health and safety, but yet they can come back to bite us many years later, particularly asbestos, and that's why we obviously pay so much attention to making sure we get asbestos right. Obviously, this was 40 years ago, and it's very difficult to know what happened at the time and what controls were in place. We have very few records going back that far, unfortunately.
Can I also ask another question on the training? I'm sorry, I've written some notes that I didn't have the papers. I did them.
Oh, of course you didn't.
So
Sorry.
I've just got the papers.
Page 10.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So sorry, Chair.
No, fine. At least you've read it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. The other thing is about the training sessions. I understand that COVID has limited what you've been able to do.
Yes.
What do you do at the training courses? Because you've delivered 18 training courses, I assume, for the staff and 9 for the schools.
Yes.
What sort of training do you give in these sessions?
Oh, all sorts. We have a slightly different programme for schools than we do corporately, but we include things like management training on health and safety, risk assessment, various first aid courses, including paediatric first aid. We also deliver to schools IOSH training for head teachers because we expect them to have a certain level of training there. And our people who coordinate the educational visits within schools, we have something called educational visits coordinator training. Schools themselves will probably organise other specific health and safety training, which is just specific to to people's roles within the school, and ditto with the corporate training. Our colleagues within the clean and green section, for instance, if you're working on a tractor or a forklift truck, they will sort that training specifically. But we have a corporate offer of things which is core across the council, including risk assessment, accident investigation, first aid, etc., and fire safety. I nearly got that one.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Vera?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering why it's page 5 and 6, why there's so many accidents in primary schools to employees and accidents to non-employees.
Well, I think when you consider how many schools we've still got, where we're still the employer, it's actually very few accidents overall. We've probably got 60 schools where we're still the employer at primary schools, and over the year that's looking at the I've got the right one, the non-employees. That's one per school almost, and on the employee side, again, it's about one per school. So in the great scheme of things, but because we have so many schools, there aren't that many accidents overall, I would suggest.
I would like some further details of this asbestos claim because I want to make sure I've got this. Thank you for that, Chris. I'm not comfortable. Obviously, I don't want to discuss that in the public session because it's prejudice any negotiation we're having. But I would like a briefing note as to what this is, where it is in the system, and what the ultimate cost could be, because I look after the finances and the budget. So I'd like that to be sent to me, please.
Okay, that's okay. I will liaise with my colleagues in risk and insurance, and we'll get something sorted on that one.
Absolutely. As a Bashir, there's a bloody fly in here.
And that's
you realise it's too cold for flying. There you go. It's got rid of you, pal.
well done.
No. I mean, you're right, no fly now, you
Just for clarification, Chair, on the reports of accidents in schools, obviously there's very few for secondary schools. That's the assumption that we don't get reports because they're academies. That's the assumption, is correct?
Yes, academies, obviously we're not the employer and they don't have to engage with us or report any health and safety incidents. Obviously, if it's a RIDO report, they have to report to HSE for the RIDO reports, but we wouldn't get to know about that because I say we're not the employer. But we do trade with some secondary schools, and some of them do let us know about some of the more serious incidents, because obviously we can support them where we trade with them.
That's as members in the committee wouldn't have realised that. So thank you for that.
Okay.
Councillor Bashir?
Thank you, Chair. On page 13, there's a mention of health and safety e-learning courses available for staff. Are these courses mandatory? And if they are they reviewed every year?
We on the health and safety front, we have very few mandatory courses because our staff don't necessarily fall into neat boxes where they, where, if you like, one course doesn't always fit all. That said, excuse me. That said, new starters should do the DSE training. So they if they're working, if they're an office worker, they should go through the DSE training so they know what basic precautions should take on DSE. We have other things on fire safety. So where staff are in some of our buildings, there is a e-learning for fire safety. But as you can imagine, because some of our courses which might be suitable for our office-based staff might not be appropriate for some of our clean and green staff who don't really use computers, etc. And they have different stuff delivered locally, often by toolbox talks. So we are actually looking at the overall training programme. We keep looking at it to make sure it's fit for purpose and it captures bits and pieces. But we are going to do some work looking at the offer for managers, because we do note that it is easy for gaps to develop where managers might be promoted or get a new job with the council and not necessarily, be as familiar with health and safety as we'd like them to. So we're looking at that in the round, basically.
Yeah, just to follow on.
Yeah.
During the pandemic, obviously people working from home. Did you design any courses for people working from home?
Not courses as such. What we did do, we contributed to the working from home. What do we call it? I forget.
Agile policy.
Agile policy. Thank you for that, Nick. With my colleague Nick, who's here today, on the agile policy, and we did a checklist for managers to basically talk through with staff the various issues of working from home, make sure that they had the right setup, etc. Obviously, that was linked into making sure that staff were necessarily got things like desks, chairs, computer equipment, etc. It was a real effort across the council involving various colleagues, our IT colleagues, etc. But then there were questions, within that to make sure that people could actually work safely from home, and that formed part of the conversation managers would have with staff, where for any number of reasons working from home might not be the right thing for an individual because of domestic violence, because of unsuitable premises, because of lack of space, etc. And that's why some staff from very early on were allowed to come back into our facilities and work, because they were seen as essential, not because they had to interface with the public, but it was essential that they could work within an office environment because their home wasn't suitable for any number of reasons.
Okay, happy with that? So okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Samra.
Thank you. On Appendix 1, when we're looking at the current safety standards, I noticed that we're out of date. The last time the first aid was renewed was in September 2017. Likewise, lifting operations 2018, and there's quite a few others. I would have thought first aid would be a rolling annual programme or something.
No, this is the safety management standards. So often very little actually changes. The requirements on first aid haven't changed in a very long time. So I said we have quite a number of safety management standards. We had at certain times delays in the review programme. There's no set review period. It is more of a rolling programme, and we reprioritise from time to time as appropriate. So, for instance, over this last year, we looked again at the lone working and home working, because obviously that was very relevant to staff working from home. We've looked at other things more recently, like the contractors' selection and control. We noticed we are having some problems with selection of not necessarily selection of contractors, but control of contractors, and so that was reviewed. So it is a rolling programme. None of them are out of date as such, because they've all been written to be fairly, should only need a light touch to refresh them in future. If we review them too quickly, we do find then that sometimes managers get overload and there's too many things to try and deal with at any one time. And so we have a programme about, we have 3 corporate health and safety boards per year, and each one of those meetings we take about 3 or 4 SMSs to, and it's usually a mixture of something which has had a few changes and others which are really light touch.
Just to follow on that, Chair. So just on the risk assessment, that was last done in November 2017. Are we saying then we've looked at this and we're satisfied with the risk assessment that was done 4.5 years ago?
This is the guidance on risk assessment rather than the risk assessments themselves. The risk assessments themselves we expect to be reviewed usually every couple of years, and some of them every year. But the actual guidance on conducting risk assessments hasn't changed fundamentally at all. If we're aware of any changes like in legislation, etc., we would bring a review forward. But there hasn't been any changes in legislation on risk assessment for many moons, and we've not felt the need to accelerate the review of that. It's probably one of the ones which is going to be done this year. Because obviously, there are a few there, as you quite rightly noticed, going back to 2017. But it is a rolling programme rather than set. We don't put a set date on things, a set use by date. We tend to have a rolling programme and we prioritise as something becomes more pertinent, more needed. That makes sense.
Yeah, can you ask you this question? From 2015 through to 2021, on school employees and non-employees, the ratio between actually reported accidents in total, 143, but the RIDDOR, the reporting of injuries and dangerous occurrences regulations, 3. So it goes 3, 3, 4, 4, 7, 4. And the ratio through the lot, 309 as against 2 RIDDOR reportables, 335, 0. Is there some different way of reporting accidents that aren't reported to RIDDOR that perhaps should be?
No, well, most of our accidents, fortunately, are fairly low key accidents. We get lots of cuts and bruises and stub toes, you name it. Most of our accidents are actually fairly mundane. RIDDOR, as you're probably aware, captures the more serious incidents, including fatalities, what's classed as specified injuries, and where staff are off for more than 7 days as a result of an accident. So we don't get very many of those. But like most good employers, we try to capture all the other accidents we have, because obviously that accident, which was very minor, it might have been just more luck than judgment, and it could have been a really nasty accident. It was just that because of a moment of time, it was it's a glancing blow rather than a really serious injury. So we try to learn from all accidents regardless, but fortunately, very, very few of them are RIDDOR reportable.
Can I say, I'm sure what you said was interesting, but I'm afraid I couldn't hear a word of it or understand the response, Chair.
I'll pick that up in the private session. Councillor Bashir, is that okay? No, it's fine. Okay, we're happy with the health and safety then? Can we move the report as set out? All those in favour of that? It's clearly carried. Thank you very much for your attendance.
Thank you, colleagues, councillors.
Thanks, Chris.
Cheers.
Moving on then to the menopause policy, as I see it. And I had some advanced knowledge of questions, which I was very grateful for from Councillor Elson. I did send them on to the officers, so they got the answers. So I'm sure that we'll be able to make progress on that. Are you doing this, Nicola, or Michelle?
It is.
I'll pick it up.
Okay, well done.
Okay. So this is the introduction of a brand new menopause policy that fills a gap in our equality and diversity piece. It's basically around raising awareness across the council of the concept of menopause, encouraging positive conversations around menopause, encouraging employees to talk about menopausal symptoms and the impact it's having on them at work. Some recent research suggests that it severely can affect a number of women, so much so that it affects either their ability to conduct work, their productivity whilst at work, or potentially even force them to leave work at a certain point. It's also very individual, so it's quite important for people to understand that it doesn't affect everyone in the same way, or for the same severity, or for the same length of time. And actually, it's thought of as a taboo subject across the organisation. And what we want to do is unravel that and actually make sure that employees and managers have got the confidence to talk about it, that employees are being supported, that they've got somewhere to go, and that we're facilitating information, external links, contacts for them to go to, that we're thinking about what we can do in their job to support them, whether that's reasonable adjustments or just having someone to talk to in terms of menopause champions. So there's lots of positive things that are proposed through the policy that is around support for our staff and encouraging that conversation and helping managers to feel comfortable having that conversation. That's the essence of the document. There's some guidance in there around forms that we can fill in to support people and encourage those conversations, and that's all included within the policy, as well as some supportive actions you can put in place when people are experiencing certain symptoms. We did provide a response to the questions that were raised, but happy to go through them and any other questions that any councillors have got.
I'll pick it up with Stacey first. Did you get Stacey?
Yeah, if we could, I've had no response in regard to questions.
That's my fault, because I was asked whether the responses should be circulated with the papers. I said no, I'd far better have them at the committee meeting themselves in relation to the replies. It was just meant that they got the answers to the questions. Perhaps you just whistle through the questions that Stacey put then and the answers that you proposed, if you wouldn't mind, so everybody knows we're all on the same page. And can I say, your acoustics are far better than the previous gentleman, but I'll pick that up in the private session.
Okay, good. I think Paul might have circulated them on the bottom of an email for anyone that's missed them. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Stacey, if I get any of these points wrong, but I think there was a question on page 29 of the report, 3.6, that asked for further clarity on menopause champions that were proposed, and that there wouldn't be qualified medical staff. So what advice would they be giving? So that is true, there wouldn't be qualified medical staff, and we do still have a separate occupational health service for that qualified medical advice. This is more about giving a contact within the organisation who staff might already be going to about certain mental health issues or certain discussions that they're having. So firstly, the mental health first aiders are going to be picking up the role of menopause champion, and they're already trained to deal with sensitive topics and sensitive conversations around mental health, but they're also going to be given some additional specific menopause training so that they can help staff with those conversations as well. Having spoke to some of the menopause first aiders already around this topic, they've actually already said that people are coming to them and approaching this topic and having this topic. So they'll be able to help by referring them to the policy, referring them to external sources, and also just potentially facilitating a conversation with the manager if needed. Shall I progress on, and you can stop me if you've got any further questions?
Yeah, I will say I've just been advised that apparently the questions were answered on an email. It's on the bottom of the email, Stace. You may not have read it yet, or may not have got it yet, but Chrissy got it. You print that off, did you? Oh, obviously you did. Can I borrow that, please? Perhaps if I pass that to Stacey, she can pick up any. I know it's a bit, but she might have further points to raise. Yeah, Stacey. While we're doing that, and Stacey's having a quick scan over that, I have to say, this is, as far as I'm aware, this is new to us, is it? And I think I'd applaud the people who've been involved, Michelle Downwards, whoever's in the team, because it's something that is basically overlooked by many. And, quite honestly, a lot of us men don't understand what's happening when a lady is obviously going through this stage of life. And so therefore, I think it's very welcome. But what it does show is that we are a diverse and equality employer. And I think that some people ought to look and see how closely we look at these things. And I'm very grateful for Stacey having put the questions to you, which you've answered, which is just scanning through now, because it's questions that perhaps none of us around here, certainly the male element of us, would have thought of. But I think that, Stacey sees this. And that's why the Personnel Committee is so good and so diverse, that we can look at it from all sides of women, men, ethnic minorities and everything else that goes with it, really. So, after.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I may have missed it, but is there anything about training of managers Because there's tips and hints for managers, but training of managers, that's one.
Good
The
question.
second thing is when it comes to some of the online training that we spoke about in the previous section, is there anything we can create to allow people, particularly as the chair said, there'll be employees who are men who may not have that fully understanding, and it may be good for them to have some of that online training so they can begin to understand and be more supportive towards their colleagues. So those two things, please.
Yes, okay. With the launch of the policy, what we're planning is a communications launch and an implementation launch that does include specific training. So e-learning is one of those. We've already looked at the procurement of a package where people can actually go on confidentially, do an e-learning module that will actually give them information around this topic. So we have that covered off. And with the introduction as well, we're also going to be getting some hands-on delivery of training to some sessions with mental health first aiders, with SMG, with managers in the organisation, where we can actually get some talkers in, some speakers in the topic, and so they're coming in to do some first-hand training as well.
Good. I'll just come back. Sorry, Councillor Bashir, and I'll come back to Stacey then. Councillor Elson. Councillor Bashir?
Yeah, I just need to know what sort of adjustments are available to employees that suffer.
Sorry,
these
Councillor Bashir,
symptoms.
can you speak into the mic
Sorry,
so
yeah.
we can all hear?
Yeah, I just need to know what adjustments are available for employees suffering from these symptoms and what powers managers have or flexibility to make those adjustments.
Okay. So there's actually within the policy, there's a detailed table that looks at, depending on what the symptom is, it gives the manager some suggestions about what might be able to alleviate that. So obviously the symptoms are all individual. It will focus on having a supportive conversation with the individual to see what they feel will help. It will form part of the normal risk assessment effectively at work. So if someone is suffering from any ailment or any illness, a manager that's long-term would be doing some supportive risk assessment to see if there were any adjustments that we could reasonably put in place. So just to give you an example, I'm just looking at the policy now, but for example, for a symptom of hot flushes, it suggests things like looking at temperature control in the work area. Can they sit next to an open window? Do they need a desk fan? Have they got access to cool drinking water? Do they need to have a space where they can have a bit of a breakout and cool down? If it's becoming too much, if it's becoming overpowering, can they take those appropriate breaks? If, for example, they work in an area where there's a heavy uniform, is there an alternative uniform or an alternative PPE that they could wear when this is happening? So that's just an example against hot flushes. But in the policy, there's a whole heap of symptoms, headaches, heart palpitations, difficulty sleeping, loss of confidence, poor concentration, forgetfulness. And there's a whole list of bullet points of certain things, depending on what works for the individual. And that will come out of a conversation, potentially occupational health advice as well, about what options you could put in place to actually help and support them through whatever it might be.
Okay. Michelle, have you got your hand up? I can't see from the screen.
Yes, so yeah, I have, Leader. It's just around saying that we are one of the first local authorities to have, when you were saying about the policy, we're one of the first local authorities to actually bring forward such a policy.
Excellent. I read the common symptoms at the page of 44, and as leader of council, I think I should have been a female because I think I've experienced all of those. Not wishing too light of it, but believe me, it's the day in the life of the leader of the council, I think. Stacey, Councillor Elson.
Sorry, Chair, I was going to say there's a section there that refers to men as well, 3.5.1.
Right, I'll look at that and see if it affects me. Councillor Elson.
Thanks, Nicola. Yeah, here for the answers. I'll be honest, I'd be interested to see how it rolls out and how it is accepted by managers, because looking at my own workplace, the majority of the male staff are very, it's menopause, I don't want to know. Buy whatever you want, get whatever you want, but I really don't want to know if it's women's problems. So I think I would be interested to see how it is rolled out and how it is accepted by, in particular, male members of staff, because the other thing is I wouldn't want to see any man across the authority put in a position where they are so uncomfortable that they don't want to be able to talk about it. But I wouldn't want to see other people's workloads increased because they've got an impact of staff coming to them with menopause issues because they can't go to their own managers.
I think that's a very good point, and I think what we need to do is perhaps you can have a report back after the first 6 months of this implementation, and then we can look at how we can have regular reports, perhaps on a quarterly basis from there on, to see how we are coping with that particular issue. You happy with that? Okay, lovely. Any other questions or comments, please? Sorry? I did, yeah. It's obviously all over. Yeah, are we happy with that then? And well done you. All those in favour of that? It's clearly carried then. Moving on to the reimbursement of personal expenses policy. I think, yes. No, code of conduct for employee workers. Sorry, I should have looked at the agenda. I'm having one of those moments. Far away. You presented that as well, Nicola?
Yes, yeah. So this is a refresh of the Code of Conduct as was. There aren't any major changes. The refresh has predominantly been following some changes in the regulations. So we've strengthened the GDPR element within the Code of Conduct. And another key focus for us was, again, the equalities, diversities and inclusion angle. So we're taking a fresh look at all of our employment policies with a view to where we can strengthen the references around equality, diversity, and then making sure it's embedded into all of our policies. Obviously, the Code of Conduct is one of our main policies for employees that we're directing to. So just emphasising that zero tolerance approach to any kind of bullying, harassment, victimisation, any form of that. And the rest of it has just been a refresh and an update.
Good. Any questions on that?
I just
Mr.
like to
Refresh, Chris?
ask a question on dress code, leader, please. You know, I'm a bit pedantic about how people dress.
You are indeed, yeah.
And many a meeting, a Teams meeting where people have been at home, I think people are dressed inappropriately, T-shirts, you know, when members, where senior people are in meetings. I just wonder who judges what's appropriate, what staff should be wearing when they're on a Teams meeting, when you can have some significant people in the meeting and looking at people who are dressing, I believe, inappropriately. Who judges that?
I may be one of those tonight because it was cold in my office. But having said that, I think there's a very good point there, Michelle, and it's one perhaps that at the head of personnel you could pick up. Yes, it's quite right. I've seen this on Teams meetings. I have to say, I did speak to one particular officer. So I've got a soft spot for the individual concerned. And he told me, well, one day I was doing a Teams meet and I got my pajamas on underneath, which, you know, it was said in a jocular manner, but you're quite right, Chris. I mean, when we've got people who are representing the council and they are the front facing of that council, then I think I know there is guidelines and people have been pulled up over their dress code. But I think perhaps you can address that. Sorry, Michelle, I just think that there are some people I've seen in meetings, some senior people, I have to say, who perhaps could be dressed a little more appropriately. Have you come across this yourself yet?
There are some instances perhaps when individuals should be wearing more, I'll use the word business attire than necessarily they have been. We are looking at, from an ongoing perspective, some guidelines around meeting etiquette, which we perhaps haven't had.
It's going to Cabinet next week, isn't it? In the report of working, blended working, I think it's within there, Chris. I have picked it up already, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, you very good point. Very good point. Okay, we're happy with that. Right, moving on then again, Nicola, before we move into the private session. Oh no, we've got 2 more yet. Personal expenses policy.
Okay, this one is a refresh following OneSource going live on expenses last year. So with the introduction of OneSource, we moved a lot of our expenses onto the automated system, and we've done more so as the year has gone on. This just brings our old policy that didn't reference OneSource in line with how people need to practically submit expenses claims now, and the approval process that was agreed through the introduction of OneSource.
It's interesting that for members who don't know, members aren't allowed to claim for any parking expenses if you are within the West Midlands conurbation. Officers can, but elected members can't. So, but I think on page 97, you've got a highlight of what the expenses are. I mean, I don't want anybody out there who's listening remotely thinking that everybody's getting paid a fortune for expenses, because that's not the case. Vera, Councillor
Because you can't claim bus fare or train fare unless you're out of the West Midlands.
Yeah, I mean, we're very badly treated, actually. Aftab.
Yeah, I'm sorry about this. Just going back a step, if you don't mind, as Chair, but the policy that we've just discussed, code of conduct, is there anything on there about social media or conduct on social media? Because
It is. I missed it because I don't do social media. Just to reflect on that then, if I may. Social media and people, officers' activity on social media. There is a policy, I know that because I've...
Yeah, but I was wondering whether it comes under the code of conduct or not.
It does come under the code of conduct. It certainly does.
It is referenced in there, yeah, 4.18, although there is a separate policy as well.
I'll allow one of you to find it while we move on with the current policy. Then somebody can tell me. Michelle, looks like you've drawn the short straw, if you know where it is.
Well, no, Nick just said where it was referenced in the code of conduct, but there is a separate policy.
There is a separate policy, yes, on code of conduct. I had it. I think you wrote it actually, Michelle, when you came, and I asked for it to be done because I was getting a little bit annoyed to see some of the comments from people who are paid employees of this council, but it's a very good point. Okay. Any other comments on the expenses policy then? No. Can I move we accept that then? All those in favour of that? It's carried. Move on to the pay policy statement and the living wage.
Okay, this is the annual refresh of the pay policy statement that we have to do annually, and the proposal to continue to pay the living wage, which the council has been paying since 2015. It went up in November to £9.50, and the proposal is that we continue to pay that. In terms of new proposals within this year's pay policy, there aren't any. It has just been brought in line with decisions that have already been made by Personnel Committee, such as the 1% that was given last April, Kickstart scheme, which has already been agreed to, and further clarifications. There is a new addition that you will see in here, but it's not necessarily a proposed new addition. It's just that it hasn't been documented elsewhere before. We've always paid a long service award to staff, but it wasn't included in the pay policy document, and this seems the right place to put it so that it is actually formally in there. So that is an addition, but it is just formalising what has been ongoing in the organisation for a number of years.
Okay, we've got some recommendations which are on page 115, which is 2.1 and 2.2. I've formally moved those so we can debate on that. Formally move that. Seconded by Councillor Tow or Councillor Samra. So moving on then, is there anything in there that warrants further explanation, or are we happy with it? Happy with it? Yeah, I'll move it then. All those in favour? It's clearly carried. I think that concludes the public session and we're moving to private now. Perhaps you can tell me when the stream has stopped.
Can I, as a point of